The rain fell hard on the alien market, turning the dirt roads into mud. Strange lights from hanging lanterns flickered in the wind. Casting long shadows on the stalls, merchants packed their goods in a hurry, afraid to stay out at night. Only a few people walked quickly through the market, heads down, not wanting to be noticed. Luro ran through the crowd, his small feet splashing in puddles, his chest burned from running. But he could not stop. His sister was out there. Somewhere in the hands of the raiders, he had no one else to turn to. Only one person could help him now. The human, Elias Kane. People called him Mighty Human, and some whispered his name with respect, others with fear. Luro's large alien eyes scanned the crowd, searching for him. He saw a tall figure bent over a broken ship engine at the far end of the market. The man's hands were steady as he worked, tightening bolts and adjusting wires. Even in the dim light, Luro could see the human's strong arms and calm face. It was strange, while the market felt full of fear. Elias worked like the danger did not exist. Luro pushed through the people, almost tripping over a crate. When he reached the human, he grabbed his arm. Elias looked up slowly, his brown eyes meeting the boy's desperate gaze. Mighty Human, please. Luro gasped, his voice shaking. My sister's been taken. You have to help me save her. Elias studied him for a moment, then put down his tools. Who took her? His voice was quiet, but sharp. The raiders, Luro whispered. Looking around as if the name itself could bring them, they came last night. They took her from our home. A few nearby merchants froze at the word raiders. One of them muttered, "They'll kill you if you go after them." Another shook his head, whispering, "No one ever comes back." But Luro's eyes were wide with hope, waiting for the human's answer. Elias stood up, towering over the boy. He wiped his hands on a cloth and said simply, "Show me where." Luro blinked, surprised. "You? You'll help." "Yes," Elias said, his voice steady, "but we need to move now." They walked quickly through the market. Past the last stalls where the shadows grew darker, Luro tried to keep up with Elias's long steps, his heart racing. "Why are you helping me?" Luro asked, his voice small, "Because no one else will." Achaeus replied without looking back. When they reached the edge of the market, the wind grew colder. The lights of the stalls faded, and only the distant glow of the city could be seen. Behind them, ahead lay the wasteland, a dark, endless stretch of cracked ground and jagged rocks. Somewhere out there, the raiders' hideout was hidden among the cliffs. Luro shivered. "It's dangerous out there." Elias glanced at him. "You don't have to come with me." But Luro shook his head. "She's my sister. I'm not leaving her." They passed an old guard post, abandoned long ago. The metal walls were covered in rust, and broken weapons lay scattered on the ground. Elias picked up a small blade, tested its weight, and kept it. Luro noticed a scar on the human's hand, long and deep. It made him wonder how many battles this man had fought before. As they walked further, the market sounds were gone, replaced by the whistle of the wind. Every step took them closer to danger. Luro felt fear in his chest. But Elias walked with the same steady pace. It was like nothing could shake him. Finally, they stopped on a small rise, looking out over the wasteland. Elias crouched down. Scanning the ground, he pointed to a set of footprints, heavy, uneven, leading toward the cliffs. "They passed through here not long ago," he said. Luro's heart jumped. "Then we can catch them." Elias's face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "We'll catch them," he said. "But we have to be careful. They'll expect someone to follow." The boy nodded. Clutching the blade Elias had given him earlier, the human adjusted the strap on his rifle, then looked at the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, a frightened girl was waiting to be saved. And Elias Kane, the mighty human, was walking straight into the storm to bring her home. The wasteland stretched out before them like a sleeping monster. silent but dangerous. The ground was cracked and dry, with sharp rocks jutting up like broken teeth. The air smelled of dust and old metal. Far in the distance, the cliffs rose high, their shadows hiding secrets no one wanted to see. Elias adjusted the strap on his rifle and glanced at Lero. "You sure about this?" The human asked. Lero nodded, even though his hands trembled. "She's my sister. I can't stay behind." They walked side by side, boots crunching against the dry earth. The sun was low, painting the land in red and gold. A cold wind swept across the ground, carrying the faint sound of something moving far away. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence felt heavy, as if the wasteland itself was watching them. Lero kept glancing at Elias. The human's face stayed calm, his eyes scanning every shadow. It was clear he had walked through dangerous places before. Lero wondered what kind of man would risk his life for someone he had just met. After an hour, they reached an old road. Cracked and half buried under sand, Elias knelt down, touching the ground. Fresh boot prints led toward the cliffs. 3. "Maybe for people," he said. "They were here not long ago." Lero's eyes widened. Then Rina could be close. They followed the tracks, moving quickly but carefully. The road dipped into a narrow pass between two jagged hills. The air here was colder, and strange claw marks lined the rocks. Lero reached out to touch one. "What made these?" Elias's voice was low, something that's better left asleep. A sound broke the stillness. A metal clank, then another. They froze, listening. From around the bend came a tall shape, walking on mechanical legs. It was a patrol drone, its red sensor light sweeping the pass. Elias pulled Lero down behind a boulder. "Don't move," he whispered. The drone's footsteps echoed as it passed, scanning the ground for a moment. Its red light stopped on their hiding place. Lero held his breath, his heart pounding. Then, slowly, the light moved away, and the machine continued down the pass. When the sound faded, Elias stood there watching this area. He looked at the hills around them, thinking, "We'll have to go off the road. Take the long way." They climbed up a rocky slope, the wind stinging their faces from the top. They could see the cliffs more clearly, tall walls of stone with dark openings like the mouths of caves. "That's where they are," Elias said, pointing to a narrow path leading inside. Lero's throat felt dry. "It looks like a trap." "It is," Elias replied. "That's why we won't walk in like they expect." The sun dipped lower, and the land began to cool. Shadows stretched across the rocks, and the sound of distant engines rumbled from the cliffs. They stopped in a shallow cave to rest. Elias handed Lero a canteen. "Drink, but not too much." Lero took a sip, the water cold against his dry mouth. "Why are you really helping me?" Lero asked, his voice quiet. Elias leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've seen too many people look away when someone needs help," he said. "I'm not one of them." They stayed in the cave until the first stars appeared. Then Elias stood. "We move at night." The moonlight turned the rock silver, and the air grew colder. Every sound seemed louder in the darkness. They moved from shadow to shadow, careful not to step on loose stones. Halfway down the slope, Eli stopped suddenly. He crouched low, motioning for Lero to do the same. On the path ahead, a piece of cloth hung from a thorn bush. Elias pulled it free. It was torn, dusty, and marked with a small hand-stitched pattern. Lero's breath caught. "That's hers, that's Rina's." Elias folded the cloth and tucked it into Lero's pocket. "She's alive," he said, "but they're moving her fast." They pressed on, following the faint sound of voices carried by the wind. The path grew narrower, the walls of the cliffs rising high on both sides. Lero could feel the danger closing in when they reached a wide ledge overlooking the raiders' camp. They lay flat on their stomachs, peering down, fires burned in metal drums. Throwing orange light over tents and scrap walls, figures moved around, some carrying weapons, others dragging supplies near the largest tent. Elias spotted a small figure with her hands tied. Even from a distance, Lero knew it was Rinna. His heart pounded, and he almost stood, but Elias grabbed his shoulder. "Not yet," the human whispered. "We go down there without a plan, and we all die." Lero's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. Elias studied the camp, his mind already working. The rescue had to be fast, silent, and deadly. Somewhere below, Rinna shivered in the cold, unaware her brother and the mighty human were watching over her, and in the darkness above, Elias Kane was about to decide exactly how to bring her home. The camp below was alive with movement, shadows shifting between the fires. Lero's eyes stayed fixed on Rinna, but Elias was watching something else. His gaze followed the guards, the patrol routes, and the gaps where no one was looking. Every detail mattered. Every second they waited was a risk. "They're not staying here long," Elias whispered. Lero looked at him in surprise. "How do you know?" "Too many people moving supplies," Elias said. "See those crates? They're loading them for travel." Lero's heart sank. "They're going to take her somewhere else." Elias studied the cliff walls, searching for a way down that would not expose them. A narrow rock path wound along the side, but it was half broken, crumbling in places. "We take that," he said, pointing. "It's risky, but it'll get us closer without them seeing us." They began their descent, moving slowly, the stones loose under their boots. Lero's foot slipped once, sending a small rock tumbling into the darkness. Both of them froze. Listening, a guard near the edge of the camp paused. Looking up, the seconds stretched. Finally, the guard turned away, and they kept moving halfway down. Elias stopped suddenly, crouching behind a boulder. Two raiders were talking just below them, their voices carrying in the still night. Elias motioned for Lero to stay hidden. Then, silent as a shadow, he slid down behind the raiders. One quick strike to the back of the neck dropped the first man. The second barely had time to turn before Elias caught him in a chokehold. When both were down, Elias dragged them into the shadows, taking a small key from one of their belts. Lero climbed down to him, wide-eyed. You didn't make a sound," he whispered. Elias only said, "Quiet feet live longer." They reached the edge of the camp's outer wall, a crude barrier of scrap metal and wood. Voices came from the other side, rough and angry. Elias put a finger to his lips, then pressed his ear to the wall. The raiders were arguing. Something about the bone corridor. Lero remembered the name. It was a place even children whispered about in fear, if they were planning to take Rinna. Through it, the danger would be far worse than the camp. They moved along the wall until they found a narrow gap. Elias peered through and saw a storage area lit by a single lamp. Stacks of crates and barrels made a maze of shadows. "Stay low," he told Lero, and they slipped inside. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. Elias moved from cover to cover, scanning for guards. Every step felt slower, every sound louder. Then Lero stopped. Pointing in the dirt was a small footprint. It was Rinna's size, and next to it, a faint drag mark of a chain. "She was here," Lero whispered, his voice shaking. Elias knelt and touched the print, feeling the dampness in the ground. "Fresh," he said. "She's close." But before they could move, a shadow fell across them. A raider stepped out from behind a crate, weapon in hand. Lero's heart jumped into his throat. But Elias was faster. He slammed the raider in two, the crate knocking him out cold. The sound echoed through the storage area. Elias grabbed Lero's arm. "Move, now." They slipped deeper into the camp, the distant sound of shouting growing louder. Someone had found the missing guards. Raiders were on alert now, and the rescue just became harder. Past the storage area, they reached a row of tents. Elias crouched low, scanning each one in the third tent. He saw movement, a small figure huddled on the ground. His heart steadied. "It's her," he whispered. But as they moved closer, another voice cut through the night. "She's not going anywhere," a deep growl said. From the shadows stepped the raider chief, a massive figure with armor made from scavenged metal. In one hand, he held a blade as long as Elias's arm. In the other, the chain tied to Rinna's wrists. Luro froze, fear locking his body. The chief's eyes were cold, fixed on Elias. "I heard a human was in my land," he said. "I thought it was a joke." Elias stepped forward, his voice calm. "Let the girl go, and I walk away." The chief laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "You'll walk away in pieces." More guards began to gather, blocking the path behind them. Luro's breathing quickened. Elias glanced around, counting enemies, measuring distance. This wasn't the moment to fight. Not yet. He needed an opening, and the chief wasn't giving him one. Then, from somewhere outside the camp, loud explosions shook the ground. The raiders turned toward the noise and confusion. Elias didn't waste a second. He grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it into the chief's eyes. The man roared, loosening his grip on the chain. Elias pulled Rinna free, shouting, "Run!" They dashed toward the far side of the camp, weaving between tents as shouts and alarms rose behind them. But before they could escape, they reached a wide, dark tunnel leading into the cliffs. Loro stopped, staring into its black depths. Elias's face was hard. "The bone corridor," he said. It was the only way out now. The mouth of the bone corridor yawned before them, a tunnel of jagged stone that swallowed the moonlight. Cold air poured out from its depths. Carrying the faint scent of rot and metal, Loro clutched Rinna's hand, his eyes wide. "Do we really have to go in there?" he asked, his voice trembling. Elias glanced behind them. Shouts and torchlight were drawing closer. "Yes," he said firmly, "we don't have a choice." They stepped into the corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. The stone was slick in places, forcing them to move carefully. Shapes like twisted bones jutted out from the sides. Na's gaze darted nervously from shadow to shadow. "I heard stories," she whispered. "People don't come out of here." Elias's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Stories keep people away. But sometimes they're true." The further they went, the narrower the tunnel became. Somewhere ahead, a slow scraping sound began. Luro froze. "What's that?" Elias held up a hand for silence, listening. The sound grew louder, like something heavy dragging itself across stone. From the darkness ahead, two figures emerged. They weren't raiders, at least not alive anymore. Their skin was pale, their eyes empty, and their bodies moved in jerks. Rusty chains hung from their wrists, clinking as they stepped forward. "They're sentries," Elias said under his breath. "The raiders leave them here to deal with intruders." One of the sentries lunged, swinging a jagged blade. Elias stepped aside, his movements quick and precise. His rifle came up, a short burst, dropping the creature to the ground. The second rushed toward Luro, but Elias kicked it back, grabbing it by the collar and slamming it against the wall. Bone cracked and it fell still. Rhina's breathing was fast. "Are there more?" "Always more," Elias said, scanning the darkness ahead. And he was right. 2 more shapes appeared, this time wearing the armor of raider guards. They were alive, and their eyes burned with hate. One carried a shock spear, the other a curved blade. They didn't hesitate, charging straight for Elias. The first thrust the spear forward, sparks dancing from its tip. Elias caught the shaft in one hand, twisting it hard. The raider stumbled, and Elias slammed an elbow into his face. Blood sprayed, and the man crumpled. The second raider's blade slashed toward Elias's side. He stepped back just in time, feeling the wind of the strike. Then he caught the man's wrist and pulled him forward, driving his knee into the raiders. Gut. The fight was fast and brutal. Elias moved like a predator, every strike efficient. Every motion precise. Luro and Rinna pressed themselves against the wall, watching with wide eyes. They had never seen anyone fight like that. When the last raider fell, Elias didn't waste a moment. He grabbed the shock spear and slung it over his back. "Let's move," he said. His voice low but urgent. They pressed deeper into the corridor. Stepping over the fallen bodies, the air grew colder. And faint whispers seemed to follow them. Luro shivered. "Do you hear that?" Elias didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. He had heard it too, and he knew it wasn't the wind. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber. In the center lay a pile of bones from creatures long dead. Their empty sockets stared at them, as if warning them to turn back. A faint glint caught Elias's eye. Hidden among the bones was a small satchel. He crouched, opening it to find a map drawn in rough lines. It showed a hidden path through the cliffs, bypassing the main raider gates. "This might be our way out," he murmured, tucking it into his pack. But before they could move on, the ground beneath them shook. From a crack in the chamber wall, a massive shape slid out, a bone serpent. Its body was covered in pale plates, and its skull-like head dripped with foul liquid. It hissed, the sound echoing through the chamber like a scream. The serpent lunged, its jaws snapping shut where Elias had been standing a moment before. He rolled to the side, pulling the shock spear from his back. Electric light danced along its tip as he drove it into the creature's side. The serpent thrashed, knocking Laurel off his feet. Rinna screamed. But Elias was already moving, leaping onto the serpent's back. He jammed the spear in again, this time into the base of its skull. The creature shuddered violently, its body twisting before it collapsed in a heap. The chamber fell silent, except for their breathing. Loro scrambled to his feet, staring at the dead beast. "You killed it," he said in disbelief. Elias just nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Let's keep moving before something bigger hears us." They left the chamber, following the tunnel until a faint light appeared ahead. The sound of the wind grew louder, carrying the scent of open air. They were close to the other side, but Elias knew the raiders wouldn't have left it unguarded. And whatever waited for them outside might be worse than what they'd faced inside. Still, they pressed on, because somewhere out there was freedom, and Elias Kane, the mighty human, wasn't about to stop now. The faint light ahead grew brighter with each step. But in the bone corridor, light didn't always mean safety. Elias slowed his pace, his rifle ready. The air was colder now, the kind of cold that felt alive. Behind him, Lero gripped Rinna's hand tightly, afraid to let her go even for a second. The walls began to change. The jagged stone smoothed into strange, carved patterns, like ribs stretching along both sides. It looked like the tunnel had been made from the remains of some giant beast. Every sound echoed, each footstep, each breath, even the faint beat of their hearts. A low rumble came from ahead, so deep they felt it in their chests. Elias raised a hand, signaling them to stop. The light now flickered, as if it came from fire rather than the moon. They moved forward slowly, crouching low, until they reached a narrow archway. Beyond it lay a vast open space, the end of the corridor. But it wasn't empty. Two large raider guards stood by the exit, their armor covered in bone and metal plates. They each carried heavy axes, their eyes scanning the place, scanning the darkness. Between them was a crude gate made of rusted spikes. Beyond that, Elias could see open air and the wasteland stretching out under the stars. "This is it," Elias whispered. "Once we're past them, we're out." Lero's eyes went wide. "We can't fight them, Can we? Elias's mouth tightened. We don't have a choice. He studied the ground. Noticing loose rocks scattered near the walls, he picked one up and tossed it into the far corner. The sound made both guards turn their heads. In that instant, Elias moved. He surged forward, covering the distance in seconds. His rifle cracking twice. One guard staggered back, wounded but still standing. The other roared and charged with his axe raised high. Elias sidestepped the blow, grabbing the guard's wrist and twisting. The axe dropped with a clang, and Elias drove his knee into the man's gut. The guard crumpled, gasping for breath, but the first guard was already coming at him again, swinging. A chain, the metal links sliced through the air, missing Elias by inches. Luro pulled Rinna back into the shadows, his heart racing. He wanted to help, but the fight was too fast, too dangerous. Elias caught the chain mid-swing, yanking it hard. And pulling the guard off balance with one swift motion, he slammed the man's head into the gate. The rusty spikes tore into his helmet, and the guard collapsed, unmoving. Silence returned, except for their breathing. Elias didn't waste time. He grabbed the fallen axe and used it to break the lock on the gate. The metal screeched, and the gate swung open, revealing the cold night beyond. They stepped out into the open air. For a moment, Luro felt hope flood his chest. The wasteland stretched before them, and the stars above seemed brighter than ever. But then Elias froze. Out on the flats ahead, a faint glimmer of movement caught his eye. He raised his rifle's scope and saw it, a small patrol of raiders on hoverbikes sweeping the area. They're looking for us. He said, we have. To move fast and keep low, they slipped into a shallow gully, moving along its winding path. The high walls of stone on either side hid them from view, but every sound seemed to echo in the stillness. Even the crunch of their boots felt too loud as they moved. Rinna suddenly stopped, her eyes fixed on something half buried in the dirt. She bent down and pulled out a strange pendant on a broken chain. Elias recognized the symbol etched into it, the mark of the Crimson Hall. It meant the raiders had been using this route for a long time, and if they were smart, they had more than one patrol nearby. The gully opened up ahead into a dry riverbed. They crossed quickly, but halfway across, the sound of engines roared. Closer, Elias cursed under his breath, pulling them toward a pile of rocks. The hoverbikes swept into view, their lights cutting across the dry ground. The riders scanned the area, weapons ready. One of them pointed toward the rocks where they hid. Elias acted without thinking. He grabbed a fist-sized stone and hurled it into the shadows far to their left. The sound drew the riders away, their bikes roaring toward the noise. Move. Elias hissed, and they darted across the open ground. When they finally reached the far side, they collapsed behind a ridge, catching their breath. Lero's chest heaved, but his eyes were full of determination. We're still not safe, are we? He asked. Elias shook his head. Not yet, but we're closer than we were an hour ago. He pulled the rough map from his pack, glancing at the lines. It showed a winding path that led through a narrow pass toward the Crimson Hall itself. Elias's jaw tightened. If they wanted to end this, they couldn't just run. They had to strike at the heart. Luro looked at him in surprise. You mean? Go to their base. Elias met his gaze. We can't keep running. They'll keep coming until we stop them for good. The night wind swept across the wasteland, carrying the scent of dust and danger. Ahead lay the path to the raiders' stronghold. And whatever waited for them inside, Elias adjusted his rifle. Rinna clung to Luro's arm. Fear still in her eyes, but trust growing with every step. And together, they set off toward the fight they couldn't avoid. The path to the Crimson Hall wound between high cliffs, the walls stained with a deep red hue. It was not paint, Elias knew, but the blood of those who had tried and failed to challenge the raiders. The air grew heavier with each step, carrying. The smell of smoke and burning oil above them. Vultures circled lazily. Waiting for the next body to fall, Rinna walked between Elias and Luro, her small hands gripping theirs tightly. She didn't speak, but her eyes were wide with fear and determination. Elias kept scanning the ridges above. The raiders would not leave their haul unguarded. And he was right. A shadow moved high on the rocks. "Sniper," Elias said quietly. Pulling the siblings behind a boulder, a single shot cracked through the air, striking the stone beside them. Dust rained down, and Rinna flinched. Elias peeked out, counting the seconds between shots. When the sniper reloaded, Elias moved. One precise shot from his rifle dropped the guard from his perch, the body tumbling down the rocks. They kept moving until the cliffs opened into a wide clearing. At the far end stood the Crimson Hall, a fortress built from metal scrap and the bones of giant beasts. Two massive tusks framed the entrance, and red banners snapped in the wind. The sound of drums echoed from inside. Slow and heavy, it was a warning, a challenge, and a promise of violence. 4 guards blocked the main gate, each armed with shock pikes. Elias studied their stances. Trained, but overconfident, he turned to Luro. "Stay with your sister, no matter what." Before Luro could answer, Elias was already moving. He strode straight toward the gate, his rifle slung across his back, his hands empty. The guards laughed when they saw him. "What's this?" One sneered, "A human who's lost his way." Elias didn't speak. When the first guard stepped forward, Elias struck. His elbow smashed into the man's jaw, dropping him instantly. The others moved in, but Elias spun low, sweeping one off his feet and grabbing the fallen shock pike. Electric light flashed as he drove it into the third guard's chest, sending him sprawling. The last one backed away, fear replacing arrogance, and ran for the gate. Elias let him go. Fear was a better messenger than any weapon. The gate loomed before them. Elias pushed it open with a creak that echoed through the hall. Inside, the light was dim, broken only by the flicker of torches. The walls were lined with trophies, weapons, helmets, and skulls. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and oil. In the center of the hall sat the raider chief on a throne. Made of welded metal and bones, he was larger than Elias remembered. His armor, a patchwork of steel and leather. His eyes narrowed as he rose, the heavy chain around his neck clinking with each step. "So," the chief growled, "the human comes to me instead of running." Elias stepped forward, his voice calm. "You've taken enough. It ends tonight." The chief laughed, the sound deep and cruel. "You think you can walk into my hall and make demands?" He signaled, and more raiders emerged from the shadows surrounding Elias. But Elias had been expecting this. He dropped a small sphere to the floor. It exploded in a flash of smoke and light. In the chaos, he moved, striking the first raider. Then the second. Every motion was precise. Every strike meant to disable, not waste time. Luro and Rinna stayed hidden near the wall, their eyes fixed on the fight. Elias moved like a storm, his shock pike crackling with each blow. The raiders fell one by one until only the chief remained. The man's massive blade gleamed in the torchlight as he stepped forward. Elias met him in the center of the hall, the two circling like predators. The first clash was like thunder, steel against steel. The chief's strength was overwhelming, each swing of his blade forcing Elias back. But Elias was faster, slipping past the heavy strikes to land precise blows. Sparks flew as weapons clashed, the sound echoing through the hall. Finally, Elias saw his chance. The chief raised his blade for a killing strike. Leaving his side exposed, Elias drove the shock pike into the gap in his armor. Electric light flared, and the chief roared in pain, dropping to one knee. Elias stood over him, breathing hard. "It's over," he said. His voice steady, the hall fell silent, the remaining raiders frozen in shock. Elias stepped back, letting the chief fall to the ground, unconscious. He turned to Luro and Rinna. "Let's go," he said. "We've got what we came for." As they left the hall, the drums had stopped. The night air was cool against their faces, for the first time since their journey began. Luro felt the weight lift from his chest, but Elias's eyes stayed on the horizon. He knew the fight wasn't truly over until they were far from Raiderland, and with the Crimson Hall behind them. They stepped back into the wasteland, ready for whatever came next.